Everyone, Joe Gentili from Saroff Gentili LLP. So I recently attended the annual conference for immigration lawyers that's sponsored by a group called AILA, which is basically the largest organization of immigration lawyers in the country. 3,500 immigration lawyers were there. Met lots of great people and attended a lot of sessions where there's lectures on immigration law and kind of the latest of what's going on. And one of the sessions basically spent about 60 seconds on a law that I am very familiar with because I've handled a bunch of cases that touch upon it, but I don't think it gets nearly enough attention in the immigration world. And that law is the False Claims Act, otherwise known as the FCA. So there's a federal version of it, and then there's these copycat state versions that maybe half the states have a version of it. And the law is in place to incentivize whistleblowers to come forward with information to the government, to help the government police and prevent fraud against itself. So if you have information related to the government being defrauded out of money, then this is a law that's used. Very powerful law. Damages in it can be tremendous for the defendants if they're found to have cheated the government. And there's two sets of incentives in there for the whistleblowers. Number one, there's protections in the law for retaliation for stepping forward. And number two, the bigger piece is the government pays the whistleblower 15 to 25% of what the government recovers from the defendants as a result of the whistleblower's information. So you'll see these cases where the fines range well into the millions of dollars, and the whistleblowers, likewise, they end up recovering millions of dollars as their reward for filing the False Claims Act case. So it can be a life-changing amount of money for people. Now, this touches a lot on the immigration world, and I want to give a couple of examples of how it could. So let's start with tech workers or white-collar workers. So that 60-second window where the False Claims Act came up at the conference had to do with a lawsuit that was settled, I think it was a year or two ago, against a tech company that was bringing in workers from abroad, I believe mostly from India. They were bringing them in on visitor visas, B visas, when in fact the proper visa for them should have been H-1B visas, because they weren't just visiting and attending a conference or something educational. They were actually performing work. And there's a number of reasons why a company would cheat on this. One of the reasons is that the filing fees for filing a B visa are much less than filing for an H-1B. Not a lot of money, I guess, in the grand scheme if this happens on behalf of one person, but when you have a company doing it on behalf of hundreds of employees doing this potentially thousands of times, it adds up to significant amounts of money. And so a whistleblower that had worked at the defendant company brought this case under the False Claims Act, and it settled. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it settled for somewhere north of $15 million. So it was a big settlement. There's lots of fees the government is cheated out of. And when it's under the False Claims Act, it's not just the fees. The government can get triple the amount of damages that you cheated them out of, plus fines and penalties. So the numbers can really get very large. Now, in that example, the whistleblower who brought the information, they'd be entitled to 15 to 25% of that amount. So let's just say, for the purposes of keeping the math simple, it was a $10 million recovery that the government got. That means that the whistleblower would be getting somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million for their role in the case, which is obviously a life-changing amount of money, and cases can go much bigger than that. So now another example, which could apply to, say, blue-collar workers, is in a lot of industries that employ immigrant blue-collar workers, the immigrants are paid in cash. And we see this a lot in the construction industry, for instance. Again, number of reasons why employers would want to pay immigrant labor in cash. One of the reasons, especially for something like construction, is they want to cheat on their workers' comp insurance premiums. So workers' comp insurance is very expensive in the construction industry because there's a high risk that workers get injured. And so by paying somebody in cash, basically what you're doing is you're not counting them officially as an employee. So if you got 100 employees and you're paying half of them in cash, then you're only telling your workers' comp insurance carrier that you have 50 employees when you really have 100. And therefore you should be paying twice as much in workers' comp insurance. Why is this a False Claims Act case? It's a False Claims Act case in a lot of states, at least New York. I know because I live and practice here. The state is in fact the largest workers' comp insurance carrier that operates in the state. So if you're cheating your workers' comp insurance carrier, if it's the state, you're cheating the state, which means it's a False Claims Act violation. And again, these are situations for companies that have large employee bases. The whistleblower rewards could run into the millions of dollars. There are other examples that could apply to white collar workers or blue collar workers. So if a company has government contracts, which is very common, the company has to certify to the government that they're going through this compliance program called E-Verify, and they're verifying that all the workers that they're hiring are in fact authorized to work in the United States legally. And companies sometimes cheat on that. And that could be a False Claims Act case, because if a company gets a government contract to do some tech outsourcing project or to build a school, build a prison, whatever it may be, if they had told the truth that they're using unauthorized workers to do this, they wouldn't get the contract. And the government may want to try to get their money back for that because they were lied to. And, it's another situation where if the whistleblower, who's an employee of the company, let's say, has information on this and they're able to file a False Claims Act case, they can get a substantial amount of money for coming forward with that information. So the False Claims Act is a very flexible law. There's a lot of different ways it could be used. And I don't think it gets enough attention in the immigration world, because most immigration lawyers, not just most people, but most immigration lawyers aren't really very familiar with the law. We are, because we've done many False Claims Act cases, and so I can see that there's a lot of applications for it in the immigration world, a lot of ways to give a immigrant worker that's been treated poorly by their employers a way to fight back and potentially recover money. So if you have any questions about this area of law or the intersection between the False Claims Act and immigration, please feel free to reach out at any time. And if this video was useful, I hope you subscribe. Thanks. Bye-bye.